Every tithe before the law was voluntary. God never required a single one. This is part two of the tithing conversation, and we're going to look at all the Old Testament moments that people try to use as evidence that Christians should still tithe. Because a lot of people will say, well, Abraham tithed, Jacob tithed, Cain and Abel brought offerings, Melchizedek received tithes, so tithing must be God's principle or before the law. But when you actually read those stories in context, none of those moments was ever commanded by God. Every one of them was spontaneous, voluntary, and personal. They weren't tithes in a sense of a required system. They were simply acts of gratitude. So let's look at Abraham. People love to use Abraham and Melchizedek to say that tithing was before the law, but Abraham didn't tithe from his income. He didn't do it from his possessions. He didn't tithe from his increase. He gave a single tenth of the spoils of war, items that didn't even belong to him, one time spontaneously. God didn't ask him to do it. Melchizedek didn't command it, and Abraham never did it again. That's not a pattern. That's just a moment. Then people point to Jacob. Jacob said, if God blesses me and keeps me safe, then I'll give him a tenth. But that wasn't God requiring anything. That was Jacob making a conditional, personal vow during a moment of fear. God didn't tell him to do it. Jacob volunteered it. It wasn't a command, not a system, not something God required from his people, just a man responding to God in the way that he felt led. And I believe God would have kept him safe without it if he would have just asked. And then Cain and Abel. That wasn't tithing, that was simply giving an offering. And again, God never commanded it. They gave because they wanted to give voluntarily. Even the book of Hebrews, where people say, look, Abraham tithed to Melchizedek. The whole purpose of Hebrews 7 is not to instruct Christians to tithe. It's to show that Jesus' priesthood is greater than Levi's. It's theological, not instructional. Hebrews never tells Christians to imitate Abraham. It uses Abraham's moment as an illustration of Jesus' superior priesthood, not as a model for new covenant giving. And that's the point. Every pre-law example that people try to use was voluntary. And once the law was given, the tithe became part of the old covenant, tied to the land of Israel, tied to the tribe of Levi, tied to the temple system, to a nation. Not to the church, not to the Gentiles, not to believers today. Then Jesus fulfills the law, brings the new covenant, tears the veil, ends the Levitical system. And not one apostle ever teaches tithing again, not once. Instead, they teach willing giving, joyful giving, relational giving, spirit-led generosity, giving rooted in love, not law. The whole story is that God has never demanded money from his children. In every covenant, he has always wanted the heart. And what flows from a heart that knows it's loved will always be greater than a tenth.